disagree with that strongly. Now, hey, hello. Listen to me. I know the chief surgeon has just rounded, and they're considering amputating that hand. I know you got a bullet in it, and the soldier behind you, I'm sure, is very grateful, but I don't believe that it needs to be amputated. I don't see any signs of gangrene. There's an old saying, well, a new saying, that our boys are in as much danger from an overexcited young surgeon as they are from the Confederates. So, I think that's your case. That's just my advice. I'm Dr. Mary Walker. If you have any questions or you want to blame anyone about it, but they don't care that much about my opinion. You should. I went to medical school. Many of them did not. Don't let them amputate your hand, all right? It's your choice. But I believe I can save it. All right. That sounds like a plan. Let me just put my... No, I don't smile often, but I'll smile about that. I'm proud of what we've done, you and me. I think that with that hand looking like that, you'll be ready to be discharged shortly. I was right, wasn't I? Mm-hmm. A cough and chest congestion. That's not a problem. Let me mix you up a mustard dressing. You want me to look at the leg first? That rash doesn't look like the rashes that we've been especially concerned about lately. Not like one of the rashes that I've seen that, seems to lead to death. So, I wager you'll be alright. Let me mix up this for your cough, though. We generally, most modern physicians, we subscribe to the miasmatic theory. That's the theory that miasmas in the air, generally, are what cause infection. And this area, it doesn't smell good. It's quite noxious. Things have to be clean in order to prevent that. Mm-hmm. Well, and you see, the fact of the matter is, absolutely. No, you're fine. You did interrupt, but that's fine. Mm-hmm. I see. I'm sorry that you went through that. So, good food, not an excess of whiskey, not an excess of, well, there meant really anything in excess. Remembering to masticate your food completely before you go to sleep. That's a severe warning. Mm-hmm. No, I really think the leg gear is fine. I'm still looking at it. I'll listen to you. It is your body. But, the cough likely comes from a sudden, violent change in temperature. Humidity, dankness, stagnant water, peculiar electric states of the air of the north here. The air and the earth. So, immoderate use of tobacco can additionally cause infection. And we also believe psychological causes could be a root. So, soldiers who are so harassed by the Confederate cavalry that their bodies cannot fight disease, we consider anxiety and fear to be the chief cause of disease in those sorts of people. And I can believe anxiety and fear here, even though in Washington you are protected compared to more southern soldiers. No, let's get this mixed up. So, I think we can apply this mustard dressing. Yes, just fiddling with some of my supplies here. What we'll do, we'll take this cloth and we will impregnate the cloth with plenty of mustard dressing. Just here. On the cloth. How do I know all that? Well, like I think I told you before, I did go to medical school. Yes. I was the only female in my class, yes. That's not surprising, I imagine. Yes. I'm just going to adjust the mustard dressing here. I would like to get a little bit of more on here. So, the army rejected me. They would not let me be a surgeon. So, I came here to volunteer in a nursing capacity. But I'm a surgeon. So, I'm not paid. The army will occasionally, I think as I've said before, choose young surgeons who don't actually have medical degrees. I did have a medical degree. It was very difficult in private practice. Many people did not want to be seen by a woman, and I see you've heard the rumors. Yes, I am divorced. If it helps, he is the one who cheated. Yes, it was highly contested, very difficult. But I prefer not to talk about private matters. Yes. Oh, it's not that severe. We just wouldn't want to. The additional anxiety and stress is not good for one's health. There we go. This is good. So why did I volunteer anyway? Well, I can't stomach the idea of someone believing they can own another person any more than I can stomach the disenfranchisement of my own kind. Yes, of women. You have many questions, and I don't mind the conversation. However, there are many soldiers. Oh, I must have dropped that. Excuse me. My clothes. What about my clothes? I've always worn pants under my skirts. My parents recommended that so that I could participate, like my sisters, in the other work that was required for tending the chores, everything that the boys had to do. Make everything fair. It was more practical. and more decent, more modest, in case one might fall down. Easier to get a lot more work done. So, that's why. I did try bloomers at one point. I used to wear them. They are a bit large. They can get in the way. Yes. No, actually, I was elected. It's a little silly, but just the year before the war, I was elected the 3rd president in the National Dress Association. The National Dress Reform Association, in their 4th annual meeting at Waterloo. I'm hoping to be elected vice president again, either this year or the next, but of course, the war takes priority. Of course. Well, that's that. I hope you never have to see me again. I hope you heal up really well. I know some surgeons like to say they hope to see you again, but I hope not to. For your sake. Thank you for your service. Hello there, newcomer. I heard you had some wounds, and I'm here to address them. Oh, I recognize you. Oh, from Washington. Didn't I tell you I didn't want to see you again? Yeah, this is the hat I was captured in. I was on neutral ground. I had stayed behind after the army had left. Yes, so in Fredericksburg, General Ambrose gave me an official army position as a civilian surgeon. Put this over here. Hygiene has been an issue here in the prisons. No, I don't think hand washing prevents infection. I just do it because I feel uncomfortable with dirty hands. I just find it dirty. Yes. I lament that there isn't any mercury or your diarrhea and dysentery. Here in the Confederate prison, well, the downside that the rebels have is that their supply lines are quite awful, so they don't have the fortune that we do. Normally, of receiving modern medications, they have to use plants. But I've been using plants for a while. I can get you some blackberry root for the diarrhea. I do have a small cup here. That should be good enough. What I was grinding earlier was blackberry root, actually. There we are. Fire and water. The ancient Greeks would have been very proud of us and our medicines. I know it's terrible here. I know you're seeing a lot of death, a lot of people starving. But at least looking over your body here, you look like the most of the wounds you have are on your face. That's where we'll be worrying about gangrene. I'll put together a poultice of white oak bark, but looking at the rest of you here, I think we're not, I did tell you that anxiety and fear can make illness worse. This is a place for anxiety and fear. Here, have a sip. I can see you're a little bit. You're not weak, it's just difficult for you to hold the cup. I'm gonna I thought you'd been here less than me, but yeah, everyone's talking about General Alexander. I came here in April 1864, this year. But obviously, I'd heard as well that in February, thank goodness, Alexander was replaced with Callahan. I understand Alexander used to mete out unauthorized lashings and frighten people with his large dog. What a coward. The dog's name was Nero. Can you believe that, historically? He seems to be an unlearned man. That much I can say. Severely unlearned. Yes. Very good. No, I don't want to switch my clothes for the clothes they've offered me. They have offered me clothes they consider women's clothes. But these are not men's clothes. These are my clothes. Would you like to have a laugh? I've saved a newspaper here. This is the Richmond Sentinel on April 22nd, 1864. Someone brought it into me. So, it reads, "The female Yankee surgeon captured by our pickets a short time since, in the neighborhood of the Army of Tennessee, was received in the city yesterday evening and sent to the castle in charge of a detective. Her appearance on the street in full male costume, with the exception of a gypsy hat, created quite an excitement amongst the idle black people and boys who followed and surrounded her. She gave her name as Dr. Mary E. Walker and declared that she had been captured on neutral ground. I was captured on neutral ground. I had stayed behind to take care of some of the soldiers. After the army had retreated, she was dressed in black pants and dark or black talma or paletot. She was consigned to the female ward of Castle Thunder, there being no accommodations at the Libby for prisoners of her sex." I've heard the Libby lately is worse than Castle Thunder, although other people have said that under Alexander, Castle Thunder was worse. Either way, I understand there's been what I would consider, and some of the wounds that I've been taking care of are what I would consider torture. The Confederates hate traitors. There are battle cries, such as kill the abolitionists and recapture the slaves. Right? They almost see it as not hatred, but because they see them as something like property, they don't see them as somebody with agency to be hated the same way. This has been my experience. So, unless someone's run away, that's a different thing. So, it's strange how little they see their fellow man. And I know my experience here has been disgusting the last few months. But in some ways I'm grateful. There are certain things that I have been spared because of my skill as a physician. This is the funny part here. We must not omit to add that she is ugly and skinny and apparently above 30 years of age. I'm old, ugly, and skinny. I've become more skinny here in prison. No, it doesn't bother me. I find it funny. I always say place your accountability between yourself and your maker, rather than men, and while they hate the women of metal, they cannot fail to respect her. That is what I have found. So, for your diarrhea and dysentery, if you don't see me again for a while, you can also use charcoal, wild lettuce. In fact, let me write down for you. Here. Charcoal, wild lettuce, peach leaf tea, rhubarb. I don't think you'll be getting sugar here, but if someone does smuggle sugar into you, persimmon and sugar, this is what's available in the South. We don't have mercury. Alright, so these wounds on your face, how did this happen? I see. I'm looking a lot at your leg. That old rash that you had, I remember you now from Washington. That old rash is not greatly improved. But again, not of the type of rash to be gangrenous. Alright, so the face. These wounds I'm concerned about. We can amputate your hand, but we can't amputate your face. So, I have found white oak bark to prevent, and I have a poultice here. I have found this to prevent gangrene exceptionally well. Yes, let me just pull it up here. That is something that hasn't gone well with me because they have decided to capture me as a spy and not a doctor. They don't like spies. They don't treat spies very well. That's why they wanted to send me to the Libby. This place used to be a tobacco factory, you know. Mm-hmm. And Whitlock's warehouse and Palmer's factory. Yes. So, Confederate deserters and political prisoners are housed in, let's see, I'm just checking how much bullets I have left, housed in Gleanors. And black and female prisoners, as you can see, here in Whitlock. And Union deserters and Union prisoners of war in Palmer's. Here. I think that'll be good to prevent the gangrene on your face. And I will have you take some willow bark for the pain. We do, in fact, have some willow bark for the pain. Oh, yeah, my Bible. That was given to me by the Confederate chaplain. I don't know if you noticed inside, he did write doctor. That was something that some of my colleagues very much struggled with. Yes. I found that in the worst of times, people have to take what they can get, and they appreciate help. Just like I have to take I lost my hairnet, and I had to trade it for, well, there was some, oh no, I'm sure they'll try to burn or hide the prison records. They can't keep an accountability of everything they've done here. Oh, absolutely not. Let me just clean a little bit up here. Yes. Oh, the Bible again, yes. So, I was brought up Methodist. My brother actually, just clean some here, my brother actually became agnostic. Yes, quite scandalous. Almost as scandalous, yes, as the divorce. Even though, when I read this Bible, I read that the fault lies on the person who committed adultery, not on the other person. So, we met in medical school. So, I've seen that verse in scripture about women not wearing men's clothes. These aren't men's clothes, they're my clothes. Well, we must change what is women's clothes. Well, for practical reasons. You can't expect someone to be useful when there's petticoats in the way, can you? No, absolutely not. There's a lot going on here. The fire. I have another poultice brewing for someone else. I can stop here for a little bit, but then I have to go on. As you can see, I'm a bit tired because there's no end to... I could be constantly on my feet and it would still not solve the problems here. In that environment, resting just brings you so much guilt. But stopping to talk a bit is something at least. I took care of someone who had been lashed, not here, but when he was a slave. And the cruel marks that were still there. How anyone can argue that the right of some state, of some government, is more important than that person's back. It is beyond me. Absolutely beyond me. But then again, I tend to be a radical. I'm also very against alcohol and very, as you understand, in support of women's dress reform. No. The instances of bravery, suffering, starvation, of wounds, death of women both north and south during this war ought to forever close the mouths of such reasoners, even if wholly ignorant of the thousands of instances in all edges of never by men excelled courage, bravery, endurance, patriotism of the woman of the past. It's the same ignorance by which General Alexander would name his dog, Nero. Have people never heard of Judith, the stepmother of Alfred, who defended England from the Danes? Philippa of Hainault, the queen of Edward III, celebrated for her skill and prudence in military affairs. I am going to put some on this lake, actually. That's what I'm doing here, as you can tell. I hope it's not uncomfortable. Let me actually get a little more poultice, and we will apply it here. So, the women were foremost in the 15th and 16th centuries in Hungary, the islands of the archipelago, and the Mediterranean, in resisting the aggression of the Turks. In the Revolution of 1789, the women of Paris were the foremost actors as actual combatants. The women marched on Versailles to bring back the King of France to Paris. During the campaign of the Army of Republican France under Dumois on the Sambre and the Meuse in 1796, the Finelli and Félicité Fernic, the daughters of Mortagne, fought at the head of Philippe Égalit's columns as they previously had at Valmy, the noisiest battle on record. I could go on. Oh, would you like me to go on? I can. I think we'll have to wrap this as well. You have so many wounds, it's going to take a while to cover them up here. Like I said, it's not the rash I'm worried about, it's everything else. And on further inspection, it seems you've hidden some of it from me. So, don't do that again. There is a phenomenon by which the physician can be blinded by illnesses or diseases or injuries that look the most obvious and miss others. For example, miss a burst lung because of a face injury. Face injuries are particularly dangerous because of that. So, fortunately, you have been just saved by your rash. Yes, we have a little bit of time. I will go on while I work on this. Agustina Zaragoza, a Spanish woman called the Maid of Zaragoza during the Spanish War of Independence in the peninsula, at the time that the most exposed battery had been silenced by the men having been killed, sprang over the dead and dying, snapped a match from a dead artilleryman, fired off a 26-pounder, and made a vow not to quit it alive during the siege, and she so inspired them that the French were repulsed with great loss. Lest you think I only praise French women. The Helvetian lady warriors were praised by Caesar in his commentaries on the Gallic War. More than once have Roman soldiers fled from the women soldiers of Switzerland. But we aren't taught these things in school, are we? History has some inconvenient truths that people are not interested in sharing. But you simply have to look at the records of what they themselves said. Such as Tacitus. According to the testimony of Tacitus, a queen of the ancient Britons led her armies to battle. Women warriors in her army, and during the crusade many women died with arms in their hands, fighting with other soldiers by their side. Of course, famously Joan of Arc, the Maid of Orleans, and Joan of Montfort, and the celebrated Margaret of Anjou, all were as brave as ever men were. Boadicea, or Bunduka, the queen of the Iceni, resisted with her armies, and that in person the legions of Rome in the fiercest and most deadly conflicts in which the empire ever engaged. She suffered some horrible indignities as a woman. Ethelfreda, the eldest daughter of Peter the Great, commanded armies and gained victories. Renée Bordereau, whose father was butchered before her eyes and who lost 42 relatives in the Civil War of La Vendée, during the course of 6 years fought in more than 200 battles, on foot and on horseback, with the most determined intrepidity. In one battle, she killed 21 of the enemy. She liberated 50 priests at one time and 800 at another. What a great difference in numbers. She must have improved greatly with her training, all of whom would have been executed. A price of 40,000 francs was set on her head. She was thrown into prison for a crime which she'd only prove her innocence by discovery of her sex, where she remained 5 years, until the accession of Louis XVIII to the throne of France. They believed she had assaulted a different woman. But the assault was so specific, it was impossible for her to have done, as she did not possess the necessary male accoutrement. Yes. Again, those of us who wear these things, they're our clothes, not men's clothes. In some cases, for a country, women have had to pretend to be men, but that does not make them less women. Oh, the Queen of Dahomey has a national guard that is composed entirely of women, numbering 5,000. Ex-Queen Isabella of Spain at one time went with her soldiers into her revolted states and entirely quieted them. About 720 years since, the Moors sought to regain Tortosa, and for a length of time the male inhabitants bore the siege firmly and with utmost bravery, but after having suffered extreme privations and every hope had vanished, they had proposed to yield to the Moors, and women attired themselves in men's clothes and made a resolute sally upon their enemies with such heroism that they were compelled to raise the siege, and the Tortosa women returned triumphant to their city, while the Moors fled in dismay and made no further attempt upon Tortosa. For the same, Don Raymond instituted an order of knighthood in which none but these brave women were admitted. He also ordained that women should be exempt from taxes, that all public meetings women should have the best seats, and all of the apparel and jewels left by their husbands should be lawfully theirs. There the women were universally honored and esteemed. And I ask myself, what of our half-republican country? What of the appreciation of American women? I suppose you could ask yourself the question as well. In future generations, historians will likely only know about the vast number of women serving in this war from soldiers' diaries and letters, not from official records. And perhaps pension records, of course, if enough women sue for their pensions, although I suspect very few will, and for those who do, calculating pay will be a complete and utter chaos, as the terms for women working with the military are so disorganized. A woman doing the same work as a nurse could be a laundress, which is often the position given to black women, or she could be a surgeon, as I was, or she could be actually a nurse, and they could all be under the title nurse, or they could be under different titles. It's the reverse in the South, where the matron, which also makes it a bit confusing. I found here that the matron is not the one in charge, I think, whereas for us the matron is in charge and the nurse works under her. Of course, we have women, as many women in the war as men, assisting with amputations, driving ambulances under fire. Of course, the majority of women are not engaged in combat the same way the men are, although I know of some who have. But there's a lot of cleaning, driving ambulances under fire, getting shot, cleaning weapons, and so forth. There's another kind of battle that many of our young women are having to face, you know. I don't know if you ever heard of Miss Roper. She was a nurse, or I think is a nurse, and at her institution she's finding that supplies were being embezzled, and they tried to rope her into it as well, into the corruption. And she reported the surgeon on multiple occasions because he was taking the supplies sent to the starving Union soldiers in the hospital and selling them. So she finally managed to stop him, but only after he had hit a young boy with a chisel, and he had a habit of imprisoning non-compliant patients in a vermin-infested dark basement, like a dungeon. Imagine you can't move and you have gangrene, and something comes to chew on you in the night. At last, he was caught. But some women have not been so lucky. This area needs cleaning here. Some women have been fired or dismissed for calling out sexual harassment by surgeons, or worse, I tell you, is the woman who's afraid to speak up. I know of one who knew the male nurses and surgeons were cooking the books and covering for each other's drunk absences, and she wouldn't say anything because who would believe her anyway? Or worse, the nurses who are given no duties, suspiciously, for their only duty is to satisfy the impure desires of the surgeon in charge. Other women won't dream of going against a colleague, no matter how much a patient is suffering. You know I'm not like that. It's common for patients to conspire with nurses. There was one nurse who got a petition of all her patients to demand she stay, and the surgeon could not dismiss her. There was another nurse whose patient-driven petition didn't help her at all when they were asking for help because of their hunger and poor conditions. And instead, she was fired for causing trouble. And of course, I, as a surgeon, understand some physicians. Sometimes you want to get rid of your nurses if they're useless and don't work. As you know, Dorothea Dix has been in charge of the nursing corps and choosing women to be in the nursing corps. My understanding is she's rejecting many women based on looks. And sometimes they usurp or undermine physicians' orders. Sometimes there are dietary requirements that a physician might have established, and a nurse, feeling bad for the patient, might bring it anyway. Sometimes he or she is right, sometimes he or she is wrong. As the war has progressed, more and more patients have requested female nurses instead of the convalescent soldiers who have been originally charged with nursing. So, I know one surgeon who threw out Mrs. Dix's nurses, all of them, called them old hags, fired them all, and instead brought in a cloister of nuns. They all shared rooms together. They weren't dramatic. They had no needs. Nuns have become very popular nurses among the surgeons. I know of one surgeon who threw blackberry wine out the window because he was so upset that a patient had obtained it. It could be that that was dangerous for the patient. Alcohol is one of the chief destroyers of humanity, but there are also, it could be that there was medicinal blackberry, who knows. So, most surgeons, or many, are still asking for nurses from Miss Dorothea Dix, and the Army Sanitation Corps. The challenge, because none of the nurses, like myself, are generally accepted into the military, it's difficult to know who is the boss sometimes, because sometimes the field commander has, and I imagine this may be the way of the world forever with the military. This may be something that doesn't really change over time. But sometimes you're not sure if you owe your loyalty to the field agent or the surgeon above you, who is in charge, who is your boss. Especially if you don't have much education and you are supposed to do what's best for the patient by listening to the surgeon. My allegiance is always to the patient, to the soldier. However, despite the conflict between nurses and surgeons sometimes, I've heard nurses say that with the exception of one or two of their surgeons, they were the most self-sacrificing people she'd ever seen. Others have described surgeons. You have been able to see that we can be a bit cold, seeing people as body parts instead of as people. This is war. You see the extremes of humanity here. It's difficult to guard your soul. But I think the hardest part is the feeling that sometimes everyone is tempted to have, that it doesn't matter what we do. With the logistics, people will not survive. That our medicine is utterly failing. I've heard that we don't even have the most modern instrument that they have in Europe. Stethoscopes for listening to the heart, microscopes. We are woefully behind at the time that we most need medicine. And it is to our shame. That's true. There is some hope. I have heard that U.S. Surgeon General William Hammond has sponsored a series of investigations in which physicians at field and general hospitals have been ordered to study the causes, transmissions, pathology, and treatment of hospital gangrene. In these investigations, patients were asked, physicians really were asked to submit their case histories to the new So there is hope that out of all this death, advancement may occur as we realize through this that we need to find out more, so that these sacrifices and deaths won't be in vain. And of course, more than anything, I hope they won't be in vain, because I hope we will achieve true freedom. I believe that if we are able to free our black population, the wave of freedom will not stop, and it will not be long before the Alliance brings enfranchisement to other groups as well. Currently, there is no group that is suffering so much as the black person. However, there is a grave underbelly, often hidden in the institution of marriage. I must on and away. It does look like my talking has finally put you to sleep. Oh my goodness. Haven't I seen you here before? It's you again. I thought I told you I didn't want to see you again. What are you doing here? You've been my patient before. And as you know, I'm sure I've told you alcohol's a devilish thing. Myself, here in New Orleans, I'm here for pants. Yes. I always found trousers to be more hygienic and comfortable, you see. Oh, that's excellent news. I'd heard that Florence Nightingale's nursing requirements are quite different than the kinds of nurses we saw in the Civil War. At that time, Miss Dix wanted to make sure that all the women were above 30, somewhat matronly, not too attractive, good at obeying orders, whereas Miss Nightingale's nurses tend to be young, wealthier, more highly educated, not so lower class as Miss Dix's. In some ways, the very nurses who have formed the foundation of nursing in this country have been excluded a bit, unfortunately, but it'll be interesting because, of course, I've heard of doctors refused in the army because of Miss Dix's requirements, feeling that a woman might be too attractive. All of these requirements on either side are, well, you can imagine how I feel about them. I'm going to be taking some time here in the quiet to work on my book. I suppose you may ask questions, but I specifically requested a pen. My book. Well, I'm going to run for office one day. Exactly, suing the federal government for my right to vote is exactly the kind of thing that I do. Susan B. Anthony, Miss Stanton, actually don't like me very much. No. We believe the same things about right to life and about women needing suffrage and things like that, but they don't respect the Constitution. I'm a constitutional purist. I know you remember me well after our time in Castle Thunder together. So you remember that history has always been very important to me. Yes. And I believe that the Constitution, as written, already gives women the right to vote. Congress just needs to accept that. Yes, because nowhere in the Constitution does it say that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are only for men. Nowhere does it say that. So, yes, I'll be here working a bit. They also consider my views on divorce to be radical and clothing. Divorce. Well, you saw that I'm a reader. I do have my Bible and so forth, but I understand that states want to protect the sanctity of marriage. But you know South Carolina is refusing to grant divorces even when a man cheats. And it's a place where a man by law can give property to his mistress with whom he is cheating, as though his wife is dead. So a woman is trapped in a loveless situation. I don't think it's radical, that I believe that should change. In fact, I think that is very much in line with the Christian scripture that every sect and denomination in the United States claims to uphold. And then in New York, where I grew up, no divorces can be had except for the crime of adultery. I understand this, but the problem is adultery is so hard to prove, especially since their husband and wife are not allowed to testify against each other in court. I'm not arguing for divorce, but I am arguing that people be required to testify in divorce cases. Women are prohibited from marrying again if they're divorced by someone else. They're allowed to if they were the ones suing for divorce, but it doesn't matter either way, because I can tell you by experience that either way she won't ever be hired. Public sentiment will keep her out of good society, and she will be forced into situations of poverty that will encourage her to enter into the houses of lecherous women. Well, you see, she prefers to live in a disreputable house where she has some voice in the rent of her body, instead of dying in the street, where perhaps she would have no voice in the matter. She does the best she can under the circumstances, and men who made the laws that sent her there, and the men who execute the laws, then visit her until she becomes too degraded for respectable gentlemen. I ask men what they would think if disreputable women from these houses of sin were allowed to vote. They would be against it. So my question is, why is it that the men who keep those houses in business are allowed to vote? I believe that if women could vote, these divorce laws would change. I'm not arguing for a no-fault divorce. Just, women also have no chance in divorce court because, having the purse strings in his grasp, the man buys up witnesses against himself or sends them to parts not known. But it will be said men are obliged to pay all the court expenses and support the wife while getting a bill from him. Yes, if he has any money, and if she swears she does not know anything and can't do anything to support herself or is too sick to do. As you know, I'm not a statist. I do want Congress to make general laws respecting marriage and divorce. This is because I believe marriage is important to the perpetuity of an intelligent government. I believe it is part of the Bill of Rights, something that Congress should be protecting and promoting. It is inherent in that. England has already begun to make reforms in these regards. I see your leg went out all right after the war. You managed to keep all your body parts. Not everyone had that experience. I don't think I've changed very much. The clothes. Well, in addition to the trousers putting me in prison, which I just find them better and better than the clothes I used to wear, and better than the bloomers, better than the dresses with pants. But because of the clothing, people have distanced themselves from me. I've been physically attacked for it. Ah, yes, marriage is an institution that is good for an intelligent government will. No, I recommend women choose a man religiously disposed. I don't consider myself anti-man. All men are not so selfish that they would not see and help to right the wrongs of women if the subject were presented to them so that they truly felt her position. But people don't see women as individuals, but rather as toys. You see this when young girls, little girls, as young as 8, lose their innocence to a family member, which is common enough. Those girls are not seen as people. And the young women have been so deprived of individuality that they are seen when old, often in the prison of a poorhouse, or shivering over a few apples or matches on the corners of streets, while their protectors, supposed men, walk quite unmoved and loudly prating about women having more rights than themselves, while they are at the same time their slaves and protectors and providers. Women, that is. Yes, men are saying right now that women have more rights in the United States than any other time or any other country. And there are women who agree with this. Women who don't want to be enfranchised because they have rich husbands and they enjoy the handouts. I always see these arguments that women are better off than men, charging women with ingratitude. 20 years ago, scarcely a man could be found who could hear the words women's rights without immediately becoming angry. And you see, men do not come out boldly and declare, and I'm writing this while I'm saying this to you, that the real ground of their opposition to the franchise of women, as we have stated, for they well know that it would be acknowledgement of the, I'm very thirsty, greatest wrongs to soul and body of women were now inflicted without her having the power to prevent them. I argue that men are actually afraid of women being equal, because in an equal society, impure men, such as adulterers, would be held to the same standard of purity as women and would not be tolerated. I believe that immorality of the physical kind, such as fornication and adultery, things that we hesitate to mention, I believe that if women were enfranchised, these things would decrease, because men would be held to the same standard as women. At any rate, men do know that the time has passed that they can, in America, control the minds of women, and soon the time will come that they cannot control the bodies either. And the bickering would end if women had social equality. Marriages would be happier. I believe women would nag their husbands less. Really, the smallest of all mean smallnesses is that which is assumed by the husband over the wife, because of his greater physical strength and her political weakness. Suppose that principle were carried out into all relations of life, and if a man were to meet a man who is physically weaker than himself, he could at any point rob and kill him. They would not accept men to be treated the same way that they treat us. Where the most just laws have been enacted, there are the happiest marriages. And the opposite is true as well. The South Seas, where we all know women are forced into marriage by kidnapping, have the unhappiest marriages. Even though we do not live in a society that has women to that extreme, I consider women who do not want the right to vote wretched women. Look at what happened to black people once they achieved enfranchisement and how much their lives have improved. Women should look to them as an example of hope. Yes, I'm just revising some of my words here. Don't mind me. No, I do public speaking of women's. In the hat and trousers, yes. Oh no, that man with daughters who does not labor for their enfranchisement is unworthy of the name father, and ought to be chastised, and cast along with the senseless fops. You know, men would rather die than see their sons humiliated, so why not their daughters? Meanwhile, they marry them off, trusting their daughters to men who they wouldn't trust with their money. So if they're really women's protectors and providers, why are women starving? And who are they being protected from? Why are the poorhouses so full of women who have been abandoned and not just divorcees? Well, as I'm sure I've told you, I'm no longer a Methodist, but I do believe in the laws of Scripture. I believe children learn of God from their parents, and parents who focus on the image of Christ and the golden rule will find good things come back to them. I should write down. All religions have some good in them, but no religion is true and genuine. It matters not what church its representatives belong to, unless it is something that makes homes happy and ennobles life generally by the precepts and examples of Christ, as embodied in the grandeur of the Golden Rule. Those religious sects living out those principles, it matters not by what names they are known to the world, will live as great and noble bodies while the time lasts, and will contribute to make the marriage relations and homes generally the dearest places on earth. I think it will be a good book. I'm going to title it Hit. It shall be published quite soon. What am I fidgeting with in my pocket? Oh, you've just made me drop it. I do carry some photographs. I'm fascinated by the technology. Oh, excuse me. Oh, yes, you can keep that one. I was going to give it to my cousin, but he refused me entry because of my dress. This one I will be keeping. Well, I don't know about you, but I've actually had a long day of being arrested. I think I will take myself a nap and then strategize on my political advancement. Oh no, I will complain in court that I, a veteran of the Civil War, with a Medal of Honor, have been arrested for something so trivial as my clothing. I will complain. But right now, I'm tired of complaining and fighting, and it was nice just to get it all off my chest. I know I am somewhat of a radical, and I have a lonely life. As I said, my cousin Isaac, quite a liberal person, very abolitionist, often had abolitionists and radicals come and stay at his home. He refused me entry for my attire, but I rarely go anywhere without my top hat. The only reason I don't have my Medal of Honor on me right now is there was an issue with my suit. Yes. So it is. We can sometimes be lonely, those of us who are unusual. But I would rather be lonely than wrong. Is that wrong? And many of the things I fought for have triumphed. Abolition triumphed. The North triumphed. I believe that there will be a triumph with women's suffrage. I very much don't want to see an amendment. I think that undermines the fabric of the Constitution. But we shall see who wins on that one, myself or Susan B. Anthony. I'll be taking a nap. Is that all right? Thank you. This metaphor